President Donald Trump is making it easier for companies to build highways, pipelines, and natural gas terminals on public land.
In the past, many of America's most critical infrastructure projects have been tied up and bogged down by an outrageously slow and burdensome federal approval process.
Under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, federal agencies need to consider the climate impact of proposed infrastructure projects. But the Trump administration is removing any climate consideration from the factors that need to be involved before an agency issues a construction permit. Environmental activists worry about the damage caused by changing the regulation, but the director of the Climate Law Institute at the Center for Biological Diversity, Cassie Siegel, says it's also an attack on the democratic process.
NEPA is our flagship law for transparency and accountability in government decision-making that affects the environment. In many instances, the NEPA process will be the only opportunity for communities to participate in decisions that may have a very big impact on their lives.
But this regulatory change didn't start with Trump. It's actually the next step in a series of bipartisan attacks on environmental regulations.
It hasn't been all that long that federal agencies have been analyzing greenhouse gas emissions and climate in NEPA documents. And since that time, federal agencies have been, for the most part, including a greenhouse gas analysis in their NEPA documents. A lot of the time, they don't do a very good job. And so there's been a lot of litigation about how should the analysis be done.
Climate change impacts only recently became a factor in the approval for permits after environmental groups sued, forcing the government to consider future effects on the climate before allowing construction. Activists initially brought the lawsuit against the Bush administration, but the legal battle continued against President Barack Obama, who added greenhouse gas emissions and climate to NEPA consideration only at the end of his second term. Obama's executive orders helped projects dodge NEPA reviews. Back in August of 2011, while activists committed civil disobedience in protest of the Keystone XL pipeline's construction, he signed an order calling for expedited federal permits. And in 2012, he ordered the creation of a permit streamlining dashboard for infrastructure projects on the same day as an event held in front of the pipes for the southern leg of the Keystone XL pipeline, where he boasted of his friendliness towards big oil.
We're opening up more than 75% of our potential oil resources offshore. We've quadrupled the number of operating rigs to a record high. We've added enough new oil and gas pipeline to encircle the earth and then some.
The orders broke the Keystone XL's southern leg into 2,227 small projects, changing the scope of the NEPA review. The Dakota Access Pipeline also used this method of review. Environmental groups have filed lawsuits about this, quote, impermissible segmentation of projects. In his second term, Obama signed the FAST Act. The bill had bipartisan support and called for the creation of a whole agency dedicated to fast-tracking the NEPA process, the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council. Republican Representative Kevin Cramer, who later served as an aide to the Trump campaign in 2016, expressed excitement about the bill's passage.
Certainly it was encouraging to be able to pass the FAST Act and have a bipartisan, bicameral bill that will become law that does something that we've been struggling to get done for a very long time, and that is it both authorizes and, more importantly, fully funds a 5-year surface transportation bill that also provides some efficiencies in the streamlining in the permitting process, especially for environmental regulations.
A week before Obama's last day in the White House, Christy Goldfuss, the Obama White House Managing Director Council on Environmental Quality, wrote a memo for the next administration of how to implement the FAST Act. Climate change is mentioned only once in the 86-page document. Goldfuss testified about the contradiction between the Obama administration's NEPA climate guidance and its decision to create a fast-track council during a September 2016 congressional hearing. She said doing the NEPA climate assessment quickly can help agencies avoid litigation.
As someone who has worked in an agency, I can tell you nothing delays things more than uncertainty. So with 90 cases in the courts, 25 different agencies trying to figure out how to address the issue of climate change, this guidance answers that question, says that we recommend they account for greenhouse gas emissions and gives them tools to do so, which allows them to move beyond the debate and do the analysis.
The Trump administration took the baton from Goldfuss, maintaining the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council despite Trump's push to dismantle other Obama-era legislation. The FAST Act and Steering Council were created after intense lobbying by ExxonMobil, BP, Koch Industries, the American Petroleum Institute, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, J.P. Morgan Chase, Amazon, and hundreds of other corporations and trade associations. In June 2018, Christy Goldfuss, now working for the Center for American Progress, an influential Washington, D.C. nonprofit founded by Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign manager John Podesta, testified in favor of the Federal Permitting Reform and Jobs Act. The bill would maintain the steering council indefinitely beyond the FAST Act's 7-year authorization. Goldfuss slammed the Trump administration for not hiring an executive director of the steering council quickly enough. Climate change did not come up a single time during her testimony.
The FIPSI executive director position is still vacant. A political appointee is particularly important in this role to demonstrate to departments and agencies the level of priority and commitment from the White House. The same is true for project sponsors who may question the legitimacy of FIPSI without political leadership. This person would have broad authority to advance the group's mission and move large projects forward.
Before the FAST Act passed, Alexander Hergott was a staffer for Senator James Inhofe, famous for bringing a snowball to the Senate floor to argue climate change isn't real. While working for Inhofe, Hergott helped lead negotiations on the FAST Act. He took trips funded by companies or groups with members lobbying for the bill, including ExxonMobil and the American Exploration and Production Council, according to congressional ethics forms reviewed by The Real News. Hergott also formerly worked as a lobbyist for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Hergott is now the executive director of the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council. He explains the council's function this way.
We actually, for the first time ever, provide a one-stop shop within the federal government to ensure that there are no communication breakdowns and that the kind of expectations that you have on your federal government to give you decisions, not necessarily yeses, but decisions in environmental reviews is essential to ensuring predictability and transparency in the permitting process.
Projects on the council's dashboard include the controversial Jordan Cove LNG facility in Oregon and the hotly contested Atlantic Coast Pipeline owned by Dominion. Before Hergott took the helm at the steering council, DJ Gribbin, the former head federal lobbyist for Koch Industries, headed up the infrastructure efforts for the Trump White House. Today, Gribbin works as a senior partner for the investment firm Stone Peak Infrastructure Partners. Listed among Stone Peak's investments are pipeline companies like Atlantic Coast Pipeline owner Dominion and Venture Global LNG, which owns a proposed LNG terminal in Louisiana, another project on the steering council's dashboard. The Obama administration placed both of these projects on its first dashboard list published in September 2016. The reauthorization bill for the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council has lobbying support from the likes of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Business Roundtable, the National Association of Manufacturers, and BP, according to OpenSecrets.org. Hergott's former employer, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, also wrote a public comment supporting Trump's recent decision to ignore climate change under NEPA. At a hearing on the reauthorization bill, Hergott paid homage to nearly a decade of bipartisan support to water down the country's bedrock environmental law.
In 2015, when I was senior staff for Senator Inhofe negotiating the FAST Act, my father unfortunately passed away, and I rushed back to Arizona, and 2 days later, Senator Boxer called me and said, would you please come back to the Hill because the bill had been hung up on our streamlining negotiations. And right outside this room, Senator Boxer gave me a hug as we walked back in with Senate staff, and she said, get back to work. And I think that spirit of bipartisanship and something that we need to remember when we're talking about Fast 41 and the streamlining initiatives that the president has engaged in.
Trump's NEPA rule had its first public hearing in Denver on February 11th and held its second in Washington, D.C. on February 25th. For the Real News Network, I'm Kim Brown.